Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Friday, November 3rd, and I thought, Rodney, that we were going to go a week without having to mention, Mineral Resources or Gina Reinhard, but overnight we see that Chris Ellison is now on the register with a 12% stake, and I think Gina has an 18% stake, and SQM has a 19.9% stake. So before commenting on that, I just wanted to throw that out there. We did publish the October scoreboard, and in line with my October Lithium Bull, which was, for some reason, I love the Rolling Stones, but I was looking at a bunch of songs, what could be positive, and there's more negative songs than positive. So I looked at the red on the scoreboard, and then I retweeted or tweeted the song Gloom and Doom, which is what is reflected on that scoreboard, with the exception of a couple of companies that have had bids, from an M&A perspective. So Azure, it was up, and LPI was up, and a few companies that had, decent exploration results. But overall, October following September has not been great, but I'm feeling a bit more positive. The unemployment numbers that just came out, the jobs report, was not very positive, which is a positive on the prospect of the pause in rate cuts or rate rises. And Jay Powell's comments earlier this week seemed to say that kind of like he's on pause, and we've had a bit of a bounce late, in the week. Albemarle and Livent both published their results, both of which, were negative and guided worse. In Albemarle's case, worse than the market expected, but Albemarle's stock is up. So there's a lot of bad news, I think already embedded, in those prices. We're going to talk about those things. Before we do all of that, I just want to remind everybody, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. Hit the notification bell for all our future videos, and visit RK Equity's website if you want to get our Lithium Bull emailed to you directly. We want to thank our sponsor, Lithium Royalty Corp. You'll hear more about them later in the video. That's their listed ticker symbol LIRC.TO in Toronto. They have a basket of some 32 royalties, I think, mostly on hard rock. And I think they acquired another one through Q2 earlier this week on the Mia property. And finally, we just had this morning our group call with our $100 and $300 Patreons. And one thing we'd like to say is that, like, our scoreboard, which we publish for free on Twitter and in the Lithium Bull, cuts off at like 25 million market cap, and there's a number of sub 25 million market cap companies that we care about that are not yet on the scoreboard. And we think a number of those have high prospectivity. And, we're thinking maybe of scheduling a special call on some of those. So if you're interested in hearing what Rodney and I, think about, those earlier stage exploration stories, please consider registering for us at the $100 Patreon tier or higher. So, Rodney, you are currently digesting the Albemarle Livent news, as well as the Mineral Resources, Pilbara, and Core and Allchem results. So they've all reported. Next week is going to be Piedmont for the first time ever. The lithium producing world is going to hear on a quarterly basis the boss, Keith Phillips, give his view. And SQM is going to come later. But where most of the companies have reported, what are you hearing, and or what are you interpreting, from those comments, in addition to the broader bullishness you've tweeted about, from a EV sales perspective coming out of China and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a particularly relevant last point you just made, Howard, and Paul Graves made the comment in the Livent earnings call, is that we are seeing no meaningful shortfalls in actual demand versus the forecast. It's still a bit perplexing when you look at what's coming through on the demand side and what's happening with live pricing. It was interesting that he said it's not reflective. Just as a reference point, I think Adamas Intelligence is about 50% gigawatt hours deployed year-on-year increase for passenger EVs for the year. I think I'm at 48%, so we're pretty much in the same ballpark. That is, to my mind, hardly a stalling. You've seen China hit record sales in October on a year-on-year basis. I think it was, over 30%, which, considering how strong October 22 was as a growth, that's very good going. I think broadly speaking, we're still on track for 14 million units. Passenger EV sales, the wholesale number production also looks good. Energy storage looks good. So there is a discrepancy, and it largely comes down to the destocking. The one thing I will concede is that it would appear that Africa, and in particular Zimbabwe, is producing more spodumene than I expected. That is going to have some impact. I think the talk is they could be almost up to a run rate of 10,000 tons of LCE by year end, which call it 80,000 tons of spodumene. So on an annualized basis, nearly 1 million tons. That's definitely come a bit out of left field. We'll see how commercially some of the lower grade material stands up and how lepidolite stands up, but that was a surprise. From the earnings calls, we saw discipline really in the production from Pilbara, from everyone. I didn't see any outliers. We haven't seen what SQM did in the quarter, but we know IGO is talking about taking less material. To my mind, I don't think, some are suggesting that's a China thing. To my mind, it's a pricing and a timing mechanism thing, because the pricing for the fourth quarter is almost $3,000 a ton, and I'm not sure how one can process that for a reasonable margin, and or how, what you do with it, and if there's offset at the holdco, even if you sell at a loss. So I'm not exactly sure. And Albemarle mentioned that on the timing of, if you remember, of the spodumene inventories versus converting to chemicals. So there is some, technical issues in their poor earnings results, but I'm not seeing masses of oversupply. I've mentioned, this time around versus 2018, 2019, we're not talking about cash-strapped juniors that are highly leveraged, that are forced to produce to fund toxic convertible bonds. We're talking about far more well-capitalized, disciplined tier one players. So I think order will be restored to the market in a more timely manner than to the 2018, 19, and whatever it was into 20. Depends on when you call it. Paul Graves called that. We shall see if Albemarle's charts, you tweeted those, about what inventory levels were on the downstream. They look pretty lean. Now that we're talking about if the US is going to ease back on rate hikes, and the next move is possibly down, or things are going to settle down in the rates market, then, and we're going to see some stability there, then that should, from a macro perspective, be better off for people buying cars and so on. But the one other thing to note, Howard, is looking at BYD's numbers and their earnings. If you look at how much they are producing and exporting, and you look at the records of all of the Chinese auto companies domestically, but they're going to start to export, I think Ford and GM are playing a dangerous game by slowing down, because China isn't. And a lot of markets near where I'm located in Africa, there are a lot of Chinese internal combustion engine cars, and I think those can be replaced with Chinese EVs, and the legacy OEMs might wake up and find that the developing world is driving $12,000 or $13,000 BYD seals or whatever it is, and not their cars. We wait to see how that plays out. and a reinforcement of the belief in the longer term fundamentals is what you mentioned, that, Chris Ellison and Gina Reinhardt are everywhere. They basically, you step onto Aussie soil and you've got them in your face.
Let's address that now. What do you think happens with Azure? This is unusual that they're in both companies. In the case of Liontown, there's a suspicion that Gina will bring in MinRes, to do mine services and whatever, and there's partnership potential there. But he's on the register of most of the companies. Here it was like she came on and then he came on, right? He might have already been on, and he in a non-disclosable position and then added to it. But it's all happened like very fast. It's still very much earlier stage than Liontown. Do you think SQM walks away, or do you think what do you think happens? I have a view, but I want to hear yours.
I think SQM wants to diversify. It's a very big prospective resource. If I'm not mistaken, Howard, I think Edison and Reinhardt have about 30% cumulatively between them in Azure.
Yeah.
I think having them as bedfellows on the board might prove to be somewhat challenging. But SQM walk away, what do they buy?
I don't think SQM walks away. I think SQM is happy in a West Farmers joint venture. I think SQM would be okay in another joint venture, but it, unlike Kidman, where they came in and they earned into 50% right away, here they made a bid for the whole company. So we're in uncharted territory. I don't know that I've seen SQM, get, have to deal with an M&A, activity here. Is Gina and Chris Ellison, working together or working independently? Are they having, are they drinking expensive red wine in some restaurant, basement in Perth?
Well,
and
look, I don't know about Aussie rules, but I know in South Africa and elsewhere, if you are working in concert, it has to be disclosed in terms of how you announce your stakes and whatever else.
I wasn't actually. I was being facetious here. Like, I don't want to call from Chris Ellison that I'm really suggesting that, but but they obviously know each other well and they're partnered in iron ore. So do you think that they would go head to head, in bidding for the whole company, or in both of their instances, they're acquiring these blocking stakes and then just sitting there? So that's my theory. My theory is that this is just going to potentially die out for a period of time. It's still very early stage. There's still no resource there. People start demanding board seats.
If you're paying over the bid price, are you going to make a higher bid for the whole company, or are you just going to block the vote on the existing bid?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a real takeover offer there, right? It's a to be honest, I don't know all the rules in Australia. You're right.
No, but I'm just saying in terms of what their logic is. One thing I think that people need to wake up to is between this Wildcat, Essential, all of the things going down, Chris Ellison might, after all is said and done, when these things are developed, be the biggest player in the world.
Yeah, and that's why I've been very happy, and I'm thinking about adding. I've been holding mineral resources, one of my biggest positions, for 5 years, and thinking of adding to it because, how do you play all this activity in Western Australia, right? I'm not going to play it through SQM. You can't play it through Hancock. And Chris Ellison, who owns, 16 or 17% of the company, I always sleep well at night, knowing, being interest aligned, with Chris, even though he's making it up as he goes along. He says, he's a shrewd, rough and tumble, entrepreneur, and and I believe owning the rock is where the margins are. So if he is the biggest player in rock, you want to be there with him. And yes, you get iron ore exposure, mine services business exposure. I think people. There was a very good interview the Mines and the Money of Mines guys, with Anthony Kavanagh, a fund manager in Australia, who I've known for 5 or 6 years, since he came onto the Piedmont share register. I tweeted about his 10 or 12-minute discussion breaking down the sum of the parts valuation of Piedmont. I would encourage our viewers to check that out. But he also talked about mineral resources as one of his positions in there, and in very positive terms as undervalued. So I'm very much aligned with him on MinRes and Piedmont. Not advice. They're shareholdings of mine. Piedmont, is an ARK equity client for a very long time. But his analysis that the offtake that Piedmont has with Sayona, he said, if you valued that and the income that they could generate versus Pilbara, then it's very cheap. I think Piedmont's trading at 2 or 3 times. But he said that offtake agreement can be valued as a royalty. And if it's valued as a royalty, it could be worth as much as, $2 billion. And he thought Carolina Lithium alone, 40 million tons, could be worth $1 billion. I tweeted that and got some flack from Sayona shareholders. So to all the Sayona shareholders out there, I'd like to say, I don't have any special information, but there's all this kind of tribalism. People own a stock, they love a stock, and then they get angry about another stock. Like, you can buy Piedmont stock if you don't like the terms on which a deal was cut. But Brett Lynch did a very good thing by bringing Keith and Piedmont into Sayona, because without them, both companies would not have gotten North American Lithium. And North American Lithium is now having good drill results. This is a very large resource, and it could be higher grade, going forward. But they did make an agreement, with the government to examine, going downstream into, potentially carbonate, potentially hydroxide. Yes, there's a half-built carbonate plant, but both Piedmont and Sayona have to decide to say yes to kind of go through that. So I don't think it's wrong for Anthony Kavanagh to just say, I don't know the outcome of that carbonate discussion, so I'm just going to assume they have a life of mine contract. So anyhow, I thought that was hats off to the Mines and Money guys for a good interview on that. And also, yeah, I very much, I like MinRes. I like, it's a bit rough and tumble. They like rock. We're hearing some rumors that they may be coming into some Canadian plays as well. Gina Reinhardt, we think that is probably the next. You're going to hear more of that. We're hearing more of that than we are, than in Brazil. But, Sigma came out with some good drill results. That's a good, portent, for, Solus Minerals and Atlas and Lithium Ionic and, our friend Emily Hirsch, who has a private, vehicle, in Brazil. If anyone's interested to hear more about that, please DM me on Twitter or get in touch. So what else do we want to talk about? I'm just going to make a quick mention for the U.S. government continues to write checks. Our friend Tazo Arima, founder of Piedmont, who is now in IperionX, received another $12.7 million from the Department of Defense. I have an iPhone 15 here that's titanium, and it's lighter. And I almost got the one with the 3, the camera with the 3 cameras for the iPhone 14, but it was too heavy for me. But when the 15 came out and it was materially lighter, I bought it. And I actually made that calculation. I saw how much it weighed. And I was also told that, the durability of it is that you don't need a case. So anyway, titanium's properties are highly relevant, and they could very well be very relevant in the auto industry. Tazo has been a pioneer. He got into lithium well before anybody else, and rather than go back into lithium, he's looking 5 years into the future with titanium. And we think if you guys want to a diversified play outside of this space in a highly critical mineral that America is almost 100% reliant on, IperionX is a great vehicle, and they have good shareholders, fidelity, and significant government support. As does Talon Metals and Nickel. They announced a $115 million grant is now being implemented. And Albemarle, just reminder, in their call, mentioned they're getting $90 million from the Department of Defense, not the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, for mining, not processing, in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. The logic of that, in combination with, what Piedmont has in North Carolina, we believe the market's giving zero value to what is the flagship asset, for Piedmont. And, I can't, I'm just shocked. We started the year, and I don't mean to over talk on Piedmont, but I just remember I was in Budapest, the Christmas holiday was not yet even over. And I saw that they had restructured, their offtake agreement with Tesla, and, to be on variable pricing and to be supplied out of Quebec instead of North Carolina. And then soon after that, they signed an agreement with LG Chem and got $75 million bucks, I think, at $70 or $75 price. And I never thought I'd see, $50 Piedmont again, right? Let alone 40, let alone 30, and it's now in the 20s, around 500 million market cap. So again, listen to the call, next week. Yes, spodumene prices are lower, but they're still very profitable. I think at Piedmont buying from $900. What else? Related to North Carolina is Toyota announced an increase in their battery plant. So this is Toyota, not the cars. There was a headline like Panasonic, major supplier for Tesla, slowing down on their batteries. But here you have Toyota, car maker, building an $8 billion now. I think that was twice the size. Toyota's a laggard in EVs, the pioneer in hybrids, but they have a 300 billion market cap. We watched a good video. I forget exactly who the analyst was, but who was talking up Toyota. Maybe their slow go, fast follower play might do well here. And he basically said Toyota is it's a great company. Always have known about their a key ingredient to their success has been their supply chain management across traditional autos, and that's how they're able to produce cars so cheaply. Toyota, through Toyota Tsusho, was early into Orocobre, now Allchem. And reading that article, I saw that Toyota Tsusho owns 10%, and Toyota Motor Company owns 90%, of that Carolina facility. And I think they currently make only one or two fully electric vehicles, but they are planning. I think they have a plant in Kentucky that's going to make their first full electric, EV in the United States. So bottom line, you put together the supply chain intelligence of Toyota, and they're here in North Carolina. The prospect that they could be sourcing, from Piedmont, from Albemarle or other companies, in North America, as they did through Orocobre, I think is a reasonable guess. Jumping in here from the editing room to tell you about Lithium Royalty Corp. Lithium Royalty Corp is at the center of a global energy transition and manages a globally diversified portfolio of lithium-focused royalties in electrification and decarbonization. With 32 royalties on 29 higher-grade, lower-cost projects from exploration to production, LIRC covers all the bases with well-managed risk, ESG considerations, and a scalable royalty structure. Lithium Royalty Corp is traded on the Toronto Stock Exchange, ticker symbol LIRC. To find out more, visit lithiumroyaltycorp.com. Canada also in the news with a $1.5 billion infrastructure fund. Some more money, is following there. And Yeah. The EV adoption slowing, which has been the headline, seems very Ford and GM specific. You've had, by the way, UAW is starting to cut deals with all of the auto companies. They're threatening to go after Tesla next. It's an interesting dynamic. Hyundai, Kia, the Koreans, they're doing pretty well. So like the Fox Newses, the CNBCs, the narrative has shifted very quickly, like anti-EV, there's no more demand, et cetera, in the US. But there's been a lot more pushback, against that in the last, couple of days, which is making a bit more optimistic. As I said, I've been getting a bunch of calls. I spoke to a trader, a very active trader in the lithium, futures market, hydroxide, et cetera. And he was just asking him, where he felt, right? The floor, like what's going on, like how his view was we could go, he thinks $20 to $22 or so, could go a little bit lower than that, but he feels that that's, a floor. And he thinks we could trade sideways for 6 to 9 months as we finalize this kind of restocking. Eric Norris in the Albemarle call said that companies are operating at like 90% utilization. So if they're operating at 90% utilization, that's usually, they've got to be buying. But if this trader is right and we go sideways and, in the second half, things will pick up and potentially sharply, the market might start pricing that in a lot sooner than that, in Q1. He felt the lepidolite break even was like 200,000 RMB. So lepidolite comes on, off, like at what point, can they start making money? And that was like in the mid to upper 20s. So there is a risk, if the price gets out of control again, that these guys will come back in the market. That's always a risk. Paul Graves suggested the price should be between 20 and 30 long term, but that doesn't mean that it can't, overshoot on the downside or overshoot on the upside. But we'll see what happens once we stabilize here. Are we going to continue to have this crazy volatility all the way on the upside, all the way on the downside? I don't know. Maybe it'll mature. Maybe the advent of the Guangzhou futures, create some risk management tools to enable, less volatility. But I feel like we're close to the bottom. And on the other hand, that article I shared with you on Zimbabwe, and you just said 1 million tons, that's how much more of that is there, right? So the spodumene duopoly that I'm talking about or hoping about, if all of a sudden you have large sources of supply that are not in public companies that we're not so aware of, then maybe Albemarle and Pilbara can't control so much. Like, how do we get a read on how, the grade, the volumes, coming from those markets?
Again, it's hard to tell off the import data, but the infrastructure, logistics, etc. There are some limitations in Zim, and he's supposed to beneficiate in country. So I don't think you can just keep extrapolating out into the never, but I think there is some scope there. But I think China has read the tea leaves on what's happening in Australia and Canada and elsewhere, and they are going to gun for Africa and Brazil, and look to secure their own supply if there is going to be some kind of a freeze out on that supply, and guys are going to look to do intermediate product and send to Europe or do their own thing. So they will look to push it. The infrastructure isn't infinite. Zimbabwe is a landlocked country. Don't forget that. South Africa is facing its own challenges on Transnet and some of the rail logistics. They can go elsewhere through other routes, but I don't think there's the potential for infinite increase out of Zimbabwe. There's room to grow it, but it's they're in load shedding, and you've got road and rail is not perfect. For now they've made it work, but can it be on a sort of exponential basis keep going from where it's at? I'm not sure. I guess we all scoffed when they said, we can be 10% of the world's production, and if they're hitting that annualized rate that they're talking about, then they are about that for this year. I wouldn't read too much into the to be able to keep scaling that beyond. There are other large deposits in other countries that might be able to play a role, but it's going to be interesting again, this whole two-tier bifurcation. Is there going to be an IRA tier one FTA sort of supply chain versus China taking up whatever's coming its way?
Do we have any view? Is this DSO, or is it like, they're concentrating the spodumene concentrate? Because in the West, you have to do resource definition, studies, permitting. How could it go from a very small amount? We always knew
Bauxite was going to ramp, and it has ramped. You've got Premier, you've got Arcadia, coming online. So that's all has got, they had feasibility studies and so on. There is some.
They got bought out a while ago, so we haven't.
It's not all chemical grade. There is some other stuff in there, but the independent small contractors, they do their thing. That's rough and tumble, as you like, how they do it. But they are going to ramp it. But as I say, I don't know in terms of resource and size if they can, if they get it to that level this year, how much more scope there is in years beyond, given infrastructure and so on. But we have heard of Nigeria, we've heard of Angola even, there's Abyssinia, so there are other deposits, popping up that we do need to get a handle on, but we have a good line of sight in the tier one and main, listed companies, and we get an assessment on where they are at. It is interesting. I know some roll their eyes at the analogy, but are we having some kind of a, like an OPEC shale, whatever moment, as to who produces and who doesn't? And what comes onto the market.
I want to mention in the context of Africa, Sam Jonah, who I think was the founder of Anglo Gold Ashanti, or one of the major shareholders, a legend in the gold mining industry, Sir Sam Jonah. There's an article where he was commending the deal that the government did with Atlantic. He was praising, it was good that he got, a higher royalty and et cetera. But he also mentioned that, the prospect of kind of going downstream is not something that's feasible, in the short term with a mine life that's only kind of 12 years. But he was praising it and basically saying that Ghana has great lithium resources, but so do other countries in Africa, like Zimbabwe, like Nigeria. And it was very good for Ghana to have gotten this behind them. Let's get this mine into production as the first of, future ones. So it's welcoming, further investment, in the country. To any worriers out there about, Atlantic or being forced to build a hydroxide or some intermediate, yes, that is, they have to do a scoping study for that, but, and they will, but there's no commitment. They don't have to do that. They'll be able to export SC6, their share, as the main business plan for Atlantic. And we interviewed them. Combined with Piedmont, I think it's 360,000 tons of spodumene production coming from that project, probably from 2025. And the market is not pricing the profitability of that project, which is very low CapEx, very low OpEx, it's plain vanilla. It's a keep it simple, stupid story in Ghana that not reflected in either Atlantic or Piedmont stock. We don't have much more time here because we have some other things happening in the next few minutes. Just I'll highlight the IMARC conference, the biggest, I think, mining conference in Sydney is, I guess just completed. Our friends at Champion Electric Metals, Jonathan Buick, I tweeted, he was down there, I guess, visiting, some people there. He has indicated the possibility of, an ASX listing at some point in the future. So I don't know what, if anything, is on, and a lot of Australians have kind of like come into, Champion stock. I might go to the Red Cloud event in Toronto next week. I haven't decided yet. I have an invitation. Benchmark Minerals is having their conference in Los Angeles, their flagship conference, in mid-November. Also deciding whether or not I can make it there, but I have some constraints as a single dad and how much travel I can do. And I am going to see you, Rodney, at the one-to-one conference. You'll be presenting. I'll be moderating later this month. So any of our viewers who are in London and want to meet Rodney and me, happy to get a beer or come to the one-to-one conference. Again, please DM me or send me an email. And then after that, Deutsche Bank is having their annual conference in December, virtual conference. So I think that summarizes the remaining major lithium conference activity. As the year is quickly moving to the end of the year. I have noticed that with all this volatility in the market, a number of groups like Rystad Energy, SMM, Adamus, and a few others are having these free webinars, and I've registered for a few of them because I don't know. So in addition to the conferences, there's a lot of angst and Sturm and Dang and kumbaya. Have we got this all wrong? Or so I'd encourage all our followers to if we see them, and we'll tweet them and retweet them. But this is where money is made, right? We often say buy the dips. I've never seen you, Rodney, as aggressive in the 5 years that I've known you. You've always been, more conservative in terms of there's no specialty chemical multiple. You don't want to pay expensive things, but you're like, licking your chops at some well-funded companies, either in the producing side or reasonably well-funded, for the exploration side. And, the activity, the Albemarle, the SQM, the Gina Reinhardt, the Chris Ellison's interest, they know what's going on in the market. They see it. Every company, Livent and Albemarle, both said there's no slowdown in auto OEM or battery companies wanting to secure supply. And that's mirrored by every junior that we represent and are talking with, who have hired investment banks. I think Global Lithium, the most recent one with Azure, Latin Resources just hired Macquarie, Atlantic, all of them have hired banks. European Metals Holdings, has also Azure and Natixis. And we talk to them, and the interest level and the site visits from the OEMs is very strong. Simon Morris said it. I mentioned it last week. I'll say it again. The next 9 months or so is the time that the auto OEMs have been waiting for. Prices are low. If you want to secure supply, get active. Move forward. I don't know if GM or Ford are going to do it. By the way, Ford cut a deal with Compass Minerals, a former client of ours, which since they signed a deal with Energy Source Minerals, for technology, they've been advancing their project. And, this was an already permitted on state land, not federal land. So it was already permitted. You thought there would be no problem. But just this year, the state government, introduced legislation that created, regulatory uncertainty as to whether or not they're going to be able to extract lithium. We had no idea. We haven't represented them for like over a year, year and a half. But, it's hard to get stuff done in America, even in things where you think it's permitted. But, Ford, LG, if they thought that they were going to get supply, JP Morgan had Compass in their forward forecasts, anyone else on the Great Salt Lake. So you just got to completely take them out now. Supply has a history of under delivering, and that's continuing to show itself. So those incumbents who have done deals for companies like Compass and have not been doing deals for hard rock because they don't like mining, they're afraid of mining, just suck it up. GM, GM's doing it anyway. And, with clay, but like Ford, did it with Liontown, I guess, on the hard rock side, but write equity checks, for spodumene. Keep it simple, stupid. Anyway, with that, we got to go because we have a 12:30 call. Signing off. Have a good weekend.